The gleaming black Maserati belonging to Alexander Xander Montgomery III sat on the shoulder of Pacific Coast Highway like a wounded swan, steam rising from the hood and the rear right tire completely deflated. Xander glanced at the Rolex Submariner on his wrist. Exactly 58 minutes until he was supposed to walk down the aisle at San Marino Episcopal Church and marry Priscilla Ashworth Vanderbilt, a woman he'd known for 3 months and loved for. Well, he was still working on that part. Shit, he muttered, running his hand through perfectly styled hair that cost $300 to maintain. His $6,000 Armani tuxedo was already beginning to stick to his body with nervous sweat. Shit. His phone rang. Obviously Bradley, his best man and best friend since Exeter. Dude, where the hell are you? Your bride-to-be is having a meltdown. Your mother is taking everyone's social temperature with a metaphorical thermometer, and the priest is making jokes about runaway grooms. My car broke down, Xander said, kicking the flat tire with unnecessary force. Flat tire, overheating, and apparently the universe decided today is the perfect day to humiliate me. Call an Uber, idiot. Xander looked at his phone screen. No signal. Of course. That's when he heard it. A diesel engine rumbling like a mechanical beast, followed by the unmistakable sound of air brakes. He turned to see a lime-yellow food truck pull up behind his car, with the words, Luna's Little Slice of Heaven painted in extravagant red letters on the side. The driver's door opened, and out stepped the most incongruously beautiful woman Xander had ever seen. Reddish-brown hair pulled into a messy bun, flour-dusted apron, worn work boots, and whiskey-colored eyes that looked like they could drill through steel. Car trouble? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Her accent had a soft southern lilt, like bourbon with honey. You could say that, Xander replied, trying not to notice how she smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, a combination that made his stomach rumble in a way that had nothing to do with food. She crouched beside the tire, her movements practical and confident. Flat tire, overheated engine. You been driving fast? A little. Actually, a lot. He was 40 minutes late for his own wedding after all. She stood up, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being evaluated and possibly failing. Let me guess. Wedding. Xander blinked. How did you... Tuxedo at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, sweating like a sinner in church and that, oh God, what have I done expression on your face. She shrugged. Plus, you've got confetti on your shoulder. He looked down. She was right. Luna Reyes, she said, extending a flour-dusted hand. And you are? Alexander Montgomery. He shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip and the warmth that traveled up his arm. Everyone calls me Xander. Of course they do. There was something in the way she said it. Not exactly disdainful, but definitely amused. Well, Mr. Xander Montgomery of the $6,000 tuxedo, what's the plan? Stand here until the tire fixes itself? How do you know how much my tux costs? Honey, I grew up fixing cars with my dad. I learned to assess the value of things by quality, not labels. She glanced at the simple silver watch on her wrist. And judging by how you're sweating, I'd say you've got about 40 minutes? 53, he corrected automatically. Luna smiled, a slow, devastating smile that made something strange happen in Xander's chest. Well, that changes everything. You want a ride? Xander looked at the lime-yellow food truck, then at his useless Maserati, then at Luna with her whiskey eyes and dangerous smile. I can't show up to my wedding in a food truck. Why not? It was a simple question, but somehow it made Xander pause. Why not? Because his mother would have a heart attack? Because the photos would be terrible? Because Alexander Montgomery III didn't do that sort of thing? Because, he began, then realized he didn't have a good answer. Luna laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made Xander want to make her laugh again. Look, I can get you there in 30 minutes, or you can stand here explaining to your tire why it picked the wrong day to go flat. She was already walking back toward the food truck. Your choice, Prince. Xander looked once more at the Maserati, thought about Priscilla's face when he told her this story, imagined his mother's reaction, and then, for the first time in his carefully planned life, Alexander Montgomery III did something completely spontaneous. Wait, he called, running after her. I'll take the ride. Luna stopped with her hand on the door handle and turned to face him, eyebrows raised. You sure? Because once you get in my truck, Mr. Xander Montgomery, I guarantee your life is about to get a whole lot more complicated. There was something in the way she said it, a promise and a warning rolled into one, that made Xander's heart race in a way that had nothing to do with his race against time. Why do I get the feeling you're not just talking about the ride? Her smile widened. Because you're smarter than you look. And as Xander climbed into the passenger seat of the food truck, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and adventure, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was about to make the most beautiful mistake of his life. The diesel engine roared back to life, and Luna put her foot on the accelerator. "Hold tight, Prince," she said, that dangerous smile sparkling in her eyes. "This is going to be one hell of a ride." The lime-yellow food truck pulled away from the shoulder, leaving the abandoned Maserati behind like a discarded piece of Xander's old life. Through the passenger window, he watched the Pacific Ocean blur past, and for the first time in months, maybe years, he had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. And surprisingly, terrifyingly, thrillingly, he couldn't wait to find out. The lime-yellow food truck rumbled to a stop in front of San Marino Episcopal Church with all the subtlety of a parade float at a funeral. Through the passenger window, Xander could see wedding guests in their Chanel suits and Hermes ties turning to stare, their expressions ranging from bewildered to mortified to, in the case of his Aunt Millicent, visibly apoplectic. "Well," Luna said, turning off the engine with a flourish, "this should be interesting." The church's Gothic spires seemed to loom disapprovingly over the food truck, as if the ancient stones themselves were questioning this breach of protocol. Xander sat frozen in the passenger seat, watching his mother emerge from the church entrance like an avenging angel in Valentino couture. Her face had gone through several color variations, pale shock, flushed embarrassment, and was now settling into a dangerous shade of burgundy that matched her lipstick. "Oh God," Xander muttered. "She's going to kill me. Actually kill me. They'll find my body in the family mausoleum." "She's not going to kill you," Luna said, though she was studying Eleanor Montgomery with the careful attention of someone assessing a potential natural disaster. "But she might consider it." Bradley appeared at his mother's shoulder, took one look at the food truck, and burst into uncontrollable laughter. Even from 50 yards away, Xander could see his best man doubled over, tears streaming down his face. "At least someone's enjoying this," Xander said. "Your friend's got good instincts." Luna turned to face him, and suddenly the spacious cab of the food truck felt very, very small. "So, what's the plan, Prince? You going to sit in here all day, or are you going to go get married?" That was the question, wasn't it? For 32 years, Xander had followed the plan. Exeter, then Harvard Business, then Harvard Law. Take over Montgomery Industries. Marry someone appropriate. Have appropriate children. Live an appropriate life. But sitting here, breathing in Luna's scent of vanilla and rebellion, watching his perfectly orchestrated world react to one moment of spontaneity, Xander felt something crack open inside his chest. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Shoot. Why did you stop? Back there on the highway. You could have just driven past." Luna was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Through the windshield, they could see the wedding guests beginning to gather in confused clusters, probably taking bets on whether the groom had finally snapped. "My dad used to say that sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, even when you don't know why." She glanced at him sideways. "Besides, you looked like you could use a friend. And now? Now you look like a man who's about to make a choice." Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "The question is, which choice are you going to make?" Before Xander could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Priscilla. "Where are you? Mother Ashworth is having vapors and the photographer is charging overtime." He showed Luna the message. She read it and whistled low. "Mother Ashworth is having vapors. Jesus, what century are we in?" "The 21st. But my family hasn't gotten the memo." Xander looked at the church, then at Luna, then back at the church. "She's a good person, Priscilla. We're compatible." "Compatible." Luna repeated the word like it tasted bad. "That's what you want on your tombstone? Here lies Xander Montgomery. He was compatible. What's wrong with compatible?" "Nothing, if you're talking about software." Luna's eyes flashed. "But we're talking about the person you're going to wake up next to for the next 50 years. The person who's going to see you when you're sick, scared, stupid, and falling apart. The person whose laugh you're going to want to hear when everything else goes to hell." Something in her voice made Xander study her face more carefully. There was a story there, pain carefully hidden behind that confident smile. You sound like you know something about that. I know something about settling for compatible. She looked away, watching a flower girl practice scattering petals on the church steps. Trust me, it's not enough. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Luna shook her head and gave him that devastating smile again. But hey, what do I know? I'm just the girl with the food truck who picked up a guy in a tux. She reached across him to open his door, her arm brushing against his chest. Go on, Prince. Your princess is waiting. Xander didn't move, couldn't move, because suddenly, with Luna's arm across his chest and her face inches from his, he realized something that made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. He didn't want to get out of the truck. Luna, he started, then stopped. What was he going to say? That in 30 minutes, she'd made him feel more alive than 3 months of engagement to Priscilla. That her laugh was already the sound he wanted to hear when everything went to hell. I know, she said quietly, and for a moment the mask slipped, and he saw something vulnerable in those whiskey eyes. But you can't stay in the truck forever, Xander. Eventually you have to choose your life. She was right, of course. But as he climbed out of the food truck and straightened his $6,000 tuxedo, as he walked toward the church where 300 guests and one compatible bride were waiting, Xander couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking away from something infinitely more valuable than anything he was walking toward. At the church entrance, his mother grabbed his arm with fingers like talons. Alexander Montgomery, what in God's name? Traffic, he said, not taking his eyes off the food truck. Through the windshield, he could see Luna watching him, her expression unreadable. Traffic does not explain why you arrived in Eleanor Montgomery seemed unable to find words for the lime-yellow truck. Food truck, Bradley supplied helpfully, still grinning. It's called a food truck, Mrs. M, and it's awesome. Bradley Charles Whitmore, you are not helping. But Xander wasn't listening. He was watching Luna start the engine, watching her put the truck in gear. She raised one hand in a small wave, casual, friendly, like they hadn't just shared the most intense 30 minutes of his life. Xander! Priscilla's voice, perfectly modulated and slightly strained, came from behind him. Darling, everyone's waiting. He turned to see his bride-to-be, resplendent in $20,000 of Italian silk and French lace. Her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon, her blue eyes wide with stress and confusion. She was beautiful. She was appropriate. She was compatible. She wasn't Luna. I'm here, he said, taking Priscilla's perfectly manicured hand. I'm sorry I'm late. As they walked into the church together, Xander heard the rumble of the diesel engine pulling away. He didn't look back. He couldn't. But he wondered as the organ began to play and 300 people rose to their feet, whether Luna was right about choosing your life, and whether he was choosing the right one. The wedding march began, and Xander Montgomery walked toward his perfectly planned future, trying not to think about the woman who smelled like cinnamon and tasted like possibility, driving away in a lime-yellow truck full of dreams he'd never even known he wanted. But in the back of his mind, her voice echoed, eventually, you have to choose your life. The question was, had he chosen, or had his life chosen him? The altar of San Marino Episcopal Church had never felt more like a stage set. Xander stood next to Reverend Patterson, acutely aware of 300 pairs of eyes watching his every micro-expression, while Pachelbel's canon echoed through the vaulted ceiling with all the subtlety of a funeral dirge. He'd been in this position for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. He knew because he kept glancing at his watch like a man timing his own execution, when the massive oak doors at the back of the church swung open. Priscilla appeared in a cloud of silk and tulle, her father's arm steady beneath her gloved hand. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, all golden perfection and practiced grace. The congregation sighed in collective appreciation, but all Xander could think about was the way Luna had looked at him when she'd said, "That's what you want on your tombstone?" Focus, he told himself. This is your wedding day, the most important day of your life, except it didn't feel important. It felt inevitable, like watching a movie he'd already seen, playing a role he'd been rehearsing his entire life. Priscilla reached the altar with her practiced smile perfectly in place. Her father, Harrison Ashworth Vanderbilt IV, shook Xander's hand with the satisfied grip of a man closing a particularly profitable merger. "She's all yours now, son." he whispered, and somehow that made Xander's stomach turn. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat with theatrical authority. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words washed over Xander like white noise. He found himself scanning the crowd, picking out familiar faces. His Harvard Business School roommate looking bored. The partners from his law firm checking their phones. His Aunt Millicent still shooting disapproving glances toward the church entrance where the food truck had been. Bradley caught his eye from the front row and gave him a questioning look. Even his best man could see something was wrong. "The union of Alexander and Priscilla in holy matrimony," the Reverend continued, "which is an honorable estate, instituted by God. Instituted by God. Or, in this case, instituted by two families who thought their children would make attractive merger partners." Xander's mind wandered to Luna's question. "What's the plan? You going to sit in here all day? Or are you going to go get married?" The question had seemed rhetorical at the time. Now it felt prophetic. "If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together," Reverend Patterson intoned, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence stretched like a held breath. This was usually the moment in movies where someone burst through the doors, when true love conquered all, when nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. This wasn't a movie. This was real life, where food truck owners with whiskey eyes and dangerous smiles didn't crash weddings, where compatible people married each other and lived appropriate lives. But as the silence continued, Xander realized something that made his blood run cold. He was waiting for someone to object. He was waiting for Luna to burst through those doors and give him a reason to stop this madness. "Very well," the Reverend said. "Alexander, do you take Priscilla to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer and poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" The words hung in the air like a trap waiting to spring. Priscilla's blue eyes were fixed on his face, trusting and expectant. His mother was dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. 300 people leaned forward slightly, waiting for the inevitable, "I do." But Xander's mind was in a lime-yellow food truck, listening to a woman with flour in her hair talk about the person whose laugh you wanted to hear when everything went to hell. "Alexander," the Reverend prompted gently. "Say it," his rational mind screamed. "Just say the words and get on with your life." But his heart was screaming something else entirely. Xander started, then stopped. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Priscilla's smile flickered, just slightly. He tried again. The problem was, he could see it all stretched out in front of him like a road map. The reception at the country club, the honeymoon in Tuscany, the house in Greenwich, the children who would attend the right schools and marry the right people and perpetuate the cycle of appropriate, compatible, perfectly planned emptiness. He could see it all, and none of it included the sound of genuine laughter, or the scent of cinnamon, or the feeling of being truly, completely alive. "Alexander," his mother's voice carried from the front pew, sharp with warning. "Darling." He looked at Priscilla, really looked at her. She was beautiful, accomplished, everything he was supposed to want. But when he tried to imagine waking up next to her every morning for the next 50 years, when he tried to picture her face being the last thing he saw before he died, all he could see were whiskey-colored eyes and a smile that promised adventure. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Priscilla's face went very pale beneath her perfect makeup. "What?" she whispered. "I'm sorry," he said again, louder this time. "I can't do this." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a dam bursting, the noise hit all at once. Gasps from the congregation, his mother's cry of, "Alexander," and somewhere in the back, the distinctive sound of Aunt Millicent having what appeared to be an actual fainting spell. But all Xander could focus on was Priscilla's face. The hurt there was real, and it cut through him like a blade. "Priscilla, I don't." Her voice was steady, which somehow made it worse. "Just don't." She turned and walked back down the aisle with perfect posture, her silk train rustling behind her like autumn leaves. Her bridesmaids followed in a confused flutter of pastel chiffon. Bradley appeared at Xander's elbow. "Dude," he said quietly, "please tell me you have a plan." Xander looked out over the chaos of the church, guests talking in furious whispers, his mother being fanned by two cousins, Reverend Patterson looking like he was questioning his career choices. "I don't have a plan," he said. "For the first time in my life, I don't have a goddamn plan." And surprisingly, terrifyingly, thrillingly, that felt like the most honest thing he'd said in years. He walked down the aisle of his own ruined wedding, past the shocked faces and whispered conversations, past his mother's mortified tears and his father's thunderous expression, past 300 people who were already composing the story they'd tell at cocktail parties for years to come. Outside the church, the October air was crisp and clean, full of possibilities. In the distance, he could hear the faint rumble of a diesel engine, though he knew it was probably just his imagination. But as he stood on the steps of San Marino Episcopal, his $6,000 tuxedo wrinkled and his perfectly planned life in ruins around him, Xander Montgomery felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt free. Now he just had to figure out what the hell to do about it. Behind him, the church doors opened, and Bradley emerged, loosening his tie. "So," his best friend said conversationally, "I'm guessing we're not going to the reception?" Xander started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, then grew into full-bodied, slightly hysterical laughter that echoed off the Gothic stones. "No," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "I don't think we're going to the reception." "Good," Bradley said, grinning, "because I have a better idea." "Yeah? What's that?" Bradley pulled out his phone and showed Xander the screen. It was a Google search for Luna's Little Slice of Heaven food truck. "I think," Bradley said, "it's time you made a choice that's actually yours." 3 hours later, Xander sat in the passenger seat of Bradley's Tesla, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck like a surrender flag, watching the fourth Luna's Little Slice of Heaven location turn out to be a complete dead end. This one was a defunct taco stand in Santa Monica, with peeling paint and a "for rent" sign that looked older than his Harvard diploma. "This is hopeless," Xander said, slumping against the leather seat. She could be anywhere in LA County. "Do you know how many food trucks operate in this city?" 4,637 according to the City Health Department website, Bradley said, scrolling through his phone with the dedication of a man on a mission. "But only 312 have permits for mobile operation today." "You researched this?" "Dude, you just walked out on the social event of the season to chase after a woman you met for 30 minutes. This is either the most romantic thing you've ever done or the most insane." Bradley grinned. "Either way, I'm not missing it." Xander's phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past 2 hours. 17 missed calls from his mother, 12 from his father, 6 from various concerned relatives, and one particularly colorful voicemail from Priscilla's mother that he wasn't brave enough to listen to yet. But the silence from Priscilla herself was somehow worse than all the outrage combined. "Maybe I should go back," he said for the dozenth time. "Try to fix this. Apologize. Explain." "Explain what? That you realized you were about to marry the wrong person? That for the first time in your life you followed your gut instead of your family's expectations?" Bradley turned to look at him seriously. "Xander, I've been your best friend for 15 years. I've watched you do everything right. Check every box, follow every rule, and I've never seen you as alive as you were when you climbed out of that food truck." The memory hit Xander like a physical blow. Luna's face when she'd said, "You can't stay in the truck forever." The way she looked at him like she could see straight through all his careful armor to something real underneath. "What if I can't find her?" "What if you can?" Bradley started the car. "Come on, I've got an idea." 20 minutes later, they were standing in the middle of the Grand Central Market downtown, surrounded by the controlled chaos of LA's most famous food hall. The air was thick with the scent of a dozen different cuisines, and Xander's stomach reminded him that he'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. "Why here?" he asked. "Because," Bradley said, leading him toward a particularly busy Korean BBQ stand, "food truck people talk, and Maria here knows everyone in the business." Maria turned out to be a tiny woman with graying hair and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She took one look at Xander's rumpled tuxedo and raised an eyebrow that could have powered a small city. "You're either coming from a wedding or going to a funeral," she said in accented English. "And judging by your face, I'm guessing wedding didn't go so well." "You could say that," Xander said. "We're looking for a food truck," Bradley explained. "Luna's Little Slice of Heaven. Yellow truck, beautiful woman with reddish hair, Luna Reyes." Maria's expression softened immediately. "Aye, that girl. Heart like an angel, stubborn like a mule, What you want with Luna? Xander felt suddenly, ridiculously tongue-tied. What did he want with Luna? To thank her for the ride, to apologize for dragging her into his mess, to tell her that in 30 minutes she'd made him question everything he thought he wanted. He's in love with her, Bradley said matter-of-factly. I'm not, Xander started, then stopped. Because maybe he was. Maybe that's exactly what this feeling was. This desperate need to see her again. This certainty that walking away from her had been the biggest mistake of his life. Maria studied his face for a long moment, then nodded like she'd found what she was looking for. Luna, she comes here Wednesdays for supplies. But today, she glanced at the clock on the wall. Today she's probably at the shelter on Figueroa. Wednesdays and Saturdays she feeds the homeless kids. Free of charge, that one. Too good for this world. Of course she did. Of course Luna spent her free time feeding homeless kids while he'd been planning a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. The shelter on Figueroa, Bradley repeated, already pulling out his phone for directions. Got it. Thank you, Maria. But the older woman held up a hand, her eyes fixed on Xander. You hurt that girl, she said quietly, and I will find you. Don't matter how fancy your suit is or how much money your family has. Luna's got enough people who've let her down. She don't need one more. The warning hit Xander like a slap. What do you mean? Mean she's been picking up the pieces of other people's messes her whole life. Her daddy left when she was 10. Her mama worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Then that pendejo she was engaged to decided he wanted someone more, how you say, refined. Maria's voice dripped with disgust. Left her 2 weeks before their wedding. Said she wasn't sophisticated enough for his family. Xander felt something cold settle in his stomach. She was engaged? 2 years ago. Beautiful wedding planned, dress bought, church reserved. He came from money like you. Promised her the world, then decided she wasn't worth the social complications. Maria's eyes narrowed. So you tell me, rich boy in the expensive suit. You here because you want something real, or because you running from something else? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Xander thought about his ruined wedding, his furious family, his perfectly planned life lying in pieces. Was he running toward Luna, or just running away? I don't know, he said finally, and the honesty of it surprised him. All I know is that she's the first person in years who made me feel like I could be more than what everyone expects me to be. Maria stared at him for another long moment, then something in her face softened. Figueroa Street Community Center, she said. But you better have more than pretty words, Nino. That girl deserves someone who'll fight for her, not just someone fighting to escape. As they left the market, Bradley glanced at him sideways. You okay? You look like you've been punched. Maybe I have been. Xander was quiet for a moment. Brad, what if I'm doing this all wrong? What if I'm just some rich asshole having a crisis, and I'm about to make it Luna's problem? What if you're not? Bradley countered. What if you're exactly what she's been waiting for, and she's exactly what you need? They drove through downtown LA in silence, past gleaming skyscrapers and tent cities, through the contradictions and complexities of a city that somehow made perfect sense and no sense at all. Like Xander's life, like this day, like the feeling in his chest that was equal parts terror and hope. The Figueroa Street Community Center turned out to be a low brick building with cheerful murals covering every available wall space. And there, parked in the side lot like a beacon of sunshine, was Luna's lime yellow food truck. Xander's heart stopped, then started beating triple time. There she is, Bradley said unnecessarily. Through the truck service window, Xander could see Luna moving around inside, her hair pulled back in that same messy bun, her movements efficient and graceful. She was handing out wrapped sandwiches to a line of kids who couldn't have been older than 18, her smile bright and genuine. She looked exactly like what she was, someone worth fighting for. What's the plan? Bradley asked. Xander watched Luna laugh at something one of the kids said, watched her ruffle a younger boy's hair with casual affection, watched her give an extra sandwich to a girl who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. No plan, he said, opening the car door. For once in my life, no plan at all. He walked toward the truck on shaking legs, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. This was the moment that would either change everything or confirm that he'd just destroyed his life for nothing. Luna looked up as he approached, and her smile faltered. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the space between the truck and the sidewalk, him in his wrinkled tuxedo, her in her flour-dusted apron, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. "Well," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral, "this is unexpected." Luna closed the service window with deliberate precision, the metal sliding shut like armor being raised. The line of kids she'd been serving dispersed with their sandwiches, shooting curious glances at the man in the expensive tuxedo standing next to their favorite food truck like a lost prince. "Miguel," she called to a teenager with kind eyes and careful hands, "can you finish cleaning up? I need to handle something." She emerged from the back of the truck a moment later, having traded her apron for a denim jacket that somehow made her look both more approachable and more guarded. Her whiskey-colored eyes were unreadable as she studied Xander's rumpled appearance. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "how'd the wedding go?" The question hit like a perfectly aimed arrow. Xander felt heat creep up his neck, though whether from embarrassment or something else entirely, he couldn't tell. "It didn't." One eyebrow arched. "Didn't what?" "Didn't happen." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying what was left of his $300 styling. I didn't say, "I do." Luna was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with that same intensity she'd shown when assessing his broken-down car. Finally, she shook her head. "Shit, Xander. What did you do?" "I told the truth." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "For maybe the first time in my adult life, I told the goddamn truth." "Which was?" "That I couldn't marry someone I didn't love. That I couldn't stand at an altar and promise forever to someone who felt like a business transaction." He took a step closer, noting how she didn't step back. "That 30 minutes in a food truck with you felt more real than 3 months of engagement to her." Something flickered in Luna's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "Xander." "No, let me finish. Please." He was breathing hard, like he'd been running, even though he'd been standing perfectly still. "I know this is crazy. I know you probably think I'm some rich asshole having a midlife crisis at 32. I know I have no right to show up here in my wedding tuxedo and dump this on you." "You're right," she said quietly. "You don't." The words stung, but he pressed on. "But I also know that when you asked me why I couldn't show up to my wedding in a food truck, you made me realize I didn't have a good answer. And when you talked about the person whose laugh I'd want to hear when everything went to hell," he swallowed hard, "I realized yours was the only laugh I could think of." Luna's composure cracked slightly. Don't what?" "Don't say things like that. Don't stand there in your $6,000 tuxedo and tell me I'm the reason you walked away from your perfect life. Because we both know that's not how this story ends." There was pain in her voice now, raw and real. And suddenly Xander understood what Maria had been trying to tell him. "Someone hurt you," he said. "Someone like me." Luna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Someone exactly like you. Rich, charming, full of pretty words about how I made him feel authentic and real. Right up until his family made it clear that the food truck girl wasn't sophisticated enough for their social circle. The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. Your engagement. 2 weeks before the wedding. 2 weeks after I'd already bought the dress, sent the invitations, arranged my whole life around his." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "He said he loved me, but he loved his trust fund more." Xander felt sick. "Luna, you're not what? You're not from a wealthy family? You didn't just walk away from a society wedding? You're not standing here telling me that a woman you've known for 3 hours somehow changed your whole perspective on life?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Because from where I'm standing, you look exactly like my worst mistake." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He was asking her to trust him based on nothing but pretty words and grand gestures, exactly like the man who'd broken her heart. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right to be scared, to not trust me, to think this is all some rich guy's fantasy that'll disappear the minute real life kicks in. Good. Then you understand why. But I'm not going anywhere." Luna stopped mid-sentence, blinking at him in surprise. "I'm not going anywhere," he repeated more firmly this time. "You want to know the difference between me and him? He walked away when things got complicated. I walked toward the complication. I chose you over everything safe and easy and expected. You chose running away over staying," she corrected. "That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Xander pulled out his phone, scrolling to his recent calls. 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 from my father. 6 from relatives I haven't spoken to in months, all wanting to know what the hell I was thinking. He looked up at her. You want to know what I was thinking? I was thinking about you asking me which choice I was going to make, and I realized I'd been making the wrong choice my entire life. Luna was staring at him now, her armor starting to crack. Xander, I know I'm asking you to take a huge leap of faith. I know I'm asking you to trust someone who probably looks exactly like your worst nightmare. He stepped closer, close enough to catch that scent of cinnamon and vanilla that had been haunting him for hours. But I'm also asking you to give me a chance to prove that some of us actually mean what we say. For a moment, they stood there in the fading afternoon light, the weight of possibility and pain hanging between them like a bridge that could either hold their weight or send them both crashing down. Then Luna's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. It's my mother. Don't answer it, Xander said quickly. Not yet, but she was already swiping to accept the call. Mama, what's wrong? Even from 3 feet away, Xander could hear the rapid-fire Spanish on the other end of the line, the urgency unmistakable even if the words weren't. Luna's face crumpled. What? When? Is she okay? More Spanish, gentler now but still urgent. I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming right now. Luna hung up and looked at Xander with eyes bright with unshed tears. My grandmother. She fell, broke her hip. They're taking her into surgery. Go, Xander said immediately. Do you need a ride? I can… No. She was already moving toward the truck, her movements sharp with worry. I need to close up. Get to the hospital. I can't… This isn't the time. She was running again, Xander realized, using the crisis as an excuse to avoid making a choice, just like he'd been doing his whole life. Luna, he called as she climbed into the driver's seat. This conversation isn't over. She looked down at him through the open window, her face a mask of worry and confusion and something that might have been hope. Yes, it is, she said softly. It has to be. The engine roared to life, and Luna pulled away without looking back, leaving Xander standing in the empty lot with his wrinkled tuxedo and his racing heart, and the terrible certainty that he'd just lost something he'd never even really had. But as he watched the lime-yellow truck disappear around the corner, heading toward whatever hospital held the woman who'd raised Luna to be strong and stubborn and impossibly kind, Xander made a decision. He wasn't giving up. Not this time. Not when it mattered. Bradley appeared at his elbow, slightly out of breath from running across the lot. So, his best friend said carefully, how did that go? Xander straightened his shoulders, feeling something settle into place in his chest, something that felt like purpose. It went exactly like it was supposed to, he said. Now help me figure out which hospital has the best orthopedic surgery unit in LA. Why? Xander started walking toward the Tesla, his stride confident for the first time all day. Because Luna Reyes is about to learn the difference between a man who runs away when things get hard and a man who shows up when it matters most. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 11 p.m. was a symphony of controlled chaos. Monitors beeping, nurses moving with purposeful efficiency, and the persistent smell of disinfectant that seemed to coat everything. Xander had been sitting in the orthopedic surgery waiting room for 4 hours, his tuxedo jacket draped over the back of an uncomfortable plastic chair, his bow tie completely abandoned somewhere around hour 2. Luna hadn't seen him yet. He'd made sure of that, positioning himself where he could watch the elevator, but stay out of her direct line of sight. She'd arrived 3 hours ago in a whirlwind of anxiety and rapid Spanish, followed by what appeared to be half the population of East LA, cousins, aunts, family friends, and neighbors who treated Luna like their own daughter. Through it all, she'd been the calm in the storm, translating for relatives whose English wasn't strong, coordinating with nurses, making sure everyone had coffee and updates. Even in crisis, she was taking care of everyone else. It was the most beautiful thing Xander had ever seen. You know, Bradley said, settling into the chair beside him with 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. Most guys send flowers after they screw up. This feels a little extreme. I didn't screw up, Xander said, accepting the coffee gratefully. I mean, I did, but not in the way you think. Enlighten me. Xander was quiet for a moment, watching Luna comfort a crying woman who looked like an older version of herself, probably her mother. I screwed up by not doing this sooner, by not choosing what I wanted instead of what everyone expected me to want. And what you want is the food truck girl who may or may not want you back. What I want is Luna. Everything else is just details. Bradley studied his friend's profile. You know there's a good chance this doesn't work out, right? That she'll see you here and think you're stalking her? Or that you're just some rich guy who thinks grand gestures can fix everything? Yeah, Xander said. I know. And you're okay with that? Xander thought about it. Really thought about it. Was he okay with the possibility that Luna would tell him to leave? That he'd destroyed his perfectly planned life for nothing? That he'd be known forever as the Montgomery who walked out on his own wedding? You know what I'm not okay with, he said finally. I'm not okay with spending the rest of my life wondering what if. I'm not okay with being the kind of man who runs away when things get complicated. And I'm definitely not okay with letting Luna think she's not worth fighting for. A commotion near the elevator caught their attention. A doctor in scrubs was approaching Luna's family group, his expression carefully neutral in that way medical professionals perfected. Xander stood up without thinking, his body moving toward Luna before his brain caught up. He stopped at the edge of the family circle, close enough to hear but far enough away to respect boundaries he wasn't sure he had the right to cross. The surgery went well, the doctor was saying in accented English. Mrs. Reyes is stable. We were able to repair the fracture with a pin and some screws. She'll need physical therapy, but there's no reason she shouldn't make a full recovery. The relief that rippled through the group was palpable. Luna's mother started crying, happy tears this time, and Luna herself seemed to deflate slightly, the tension she'd been carrying finally releasing. Can we see her? Luna asked. She's in recovery now. Give us another hour or so and then family can visit. Just a few at a time, though. As the doctor walked away, Luna turned to start organizing the visiting schedule, and that's when she saw him. Her eyes went wide with surprise, then narrowed with something that might have been anger. She said something rapid in Spanish to her mother, then walked over to where Xander stood. What are you doing here? Her voice was carefully controlled, but he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the worry lines around her eyes. I wanted to make sure she was okay, that you were okay. How did you even know which hospital? She stopped, shaking her head. Never mind. I don't want to know. Luna? No. She held up a hand. Not here. Not now. My grandmother just had surgery. My family is here. And I can't deal with whatever this is right now. She was right, of course. This wasn't the time or place for grand gestures or emotional confrontations. But Xander had learned something important in the past few hours of waiting. Sometimes showing up wasn't about what you needed to say. Sometimes it was just about being there. Okay, he said simply. Luna blinked, clearly having expected an argument. Okay? You're right. This isn't about me or us or whatever this is. It's about your grandmother. He gestured toward the uncomfortable waiting room chairs. I'll just be here, in case you need anything. Coffee, food, someone to translate insurance forms. Whatever you need. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. For a moment they stared at each other across the antiseptic hospital corridor. Then Luna's youngest cousin, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, appeared at her elbow. Luna, she said in heavily accented English. Mama wants to know if the fancy man is your boyfriend. Luna's cheeks flushed pink. No, mija. It's complicated. The girl looked Xander up and down with the brutally honest assessment only teenagers could manage. He's been here for hours, she said matter-of-factly. Didn't eat nothing. Didn't leave even when Tia Carmen was crying loud. Seems like boyfriend behavior to me. Carmen, Luna called in exasperation, but the girl was already skipping back toward the family group, clearly pleased with herself. Kids, Luna muttered. Smart kids, Xander said quietly. Luna looked at him for a long moment, some of the walls in her eyes cracking slightly. Why are you really here, Xander? The honest answer would have been, because I'm falling in love with you, and I needed to prove that I'm not like the man who broke your heart. Because I needed to show you that when I say I'm not going anywhere, I mean it. Because you've been taking care of everyone else your whole life, and I wanted to be someone who takes care of you. But that was too much, too soon, too complicated for a hospital corridor at midnight. So instead, he said, because you told me that some choices are about choosing your life, and I'm choosing mine. Something shifted in Luna's expression, surprise, maybe, or the beginning of hope. Before she could respond, her mother appeared, a small woman with Luna's eyes and a smile that could power half of Los Angeles. Luna, mija, she said, switching seamlessly to English. Introduce me to your friend. Mama, he's not. I'm Xander. he said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Reyes." Luna's mother, Rosa, she introduced herself, shook his hand with a grip that reminded him of her daughter's. "You're the one who gave Luna the ride today, see?" "See?" he said, grateful for the Spanish classes he'd mostly slept through at Harvard. "I mean, yes. She saved me, actually." Rosa studied his face with the same intensity Luna had shown when assessing his broken car. After a moment, she nodded approvingly. "Good," she said. "Luna, she saves everybody. About time somebody saved her back." "Mama," Luna protested, but there was less heat in it than before. "You hungry?" Rosa asked Xander. "I brought sandwiches. Luna taught me the recipe." And somehow, impossibly, Xander found himself sitting in a hospital waiting room at midnight, eating the best sandwich of his life, while Luna's family told stories about the woman who'd raised them all to be fighters. Luna sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed when she laughed, and every time she smiled, Xander felt something in his chest ease. This was what he'd been missing his whole life. Not the perfect wedding or the appropriate bride or the carefully planned future. This. Real people, real love, real connection that didn't depend on trust funds or social connections or whether you went to the right schools. Around 2 a.m., when they finally got to see Abuela Reyes, a tiny woman with fierce eyes who gripped Xander's hand surprisingly hard and said something in rapid Spanish that made Luna blush, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. Luna wasn't looking at him like he was her worst mistake anymore. She was looking at him like he might actually be who he claimed to be. "Thank you," she said as they walked back to the waiting room, "for staying, for being here, she gestured helplessly. "I don't know. All of it. Thank you for letting me stay." They were alone in the corridor now, her family having finally been convinced to go home and get some rest while Luna stayed overnight in case her grandmother needed anything. "Xander," she said, stopping in the middle of the hallway, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do. I was so scared of being hurt again that I didn't really listen to what you were saying. I just heard what I expected to hear." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "But you've been here for 6 hours. You met my whole family. You ate my mother's sandwiches. You held my cousin's baby while she cried about her divorce. That's not what someone does if they're just having a crisis. Luna, I'm not saying I'm ready to trust you completely. I'm not saying this is going to be easy, or that I know how to navigate dating someone from your world." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her whiskey eyes. "But I'm saying maybe I'm ready to try. If you're willing to be patient while I figure out how to believe in this." Xander felt something expand in his chest, warm and bright and terrifying. "Are you asking me out, Luna Reyes?" Her smile was slow and devastating and full of promise. "I'm asking if you want to get coffee sometime. Real coffee, not the hospital sludge. Maybe we can start there." "I'd like that," he said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything. "I'd like that very much." "Good." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, soft and sweet and full of possibilities. "Now go home and get some sleep. I have a feeling tomorrow's going to be complicated enough without you passing out from exhaustion." As Xander walked toward the elevator, Bradley falling into step beside him, he realized something that made him smile. For the first time in his 32 years, he was looking forward to complicated. His phone buzzed with a text from Luna. "Coffee Sunday? I know a place." He typed back immediately, "I'll bring the food truck." Her response came quickly, "Don't push it, Montgomery." But he could practically hear her laughing as she typed it. Outside the hospital, the Los Angeles sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. It was going to be a beautiful day. 6 months later, the lime-yellow food truck sat parked outside Montgomery Industries, causing exactly the kind of scene Xander had once been terrified of. Employees were taking pictures, his assistant was fielding calls from gossip blogs, and his mother had already phoned 3 times to express her concerns. Xander couldn't have been happier. "You ready for this?" Luna asked, adjusting her hair in the truck's mirror. She was wearing a dress today, something soft and green that made her eyes look like liquid gold, but she still had flour under her fingernails and the scent of cinnamon in her hair. "Are you kidding?" Xander straightened his tie, then loosened it again. Luna had been teaching him that not everything had to be perfect. "I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it." They were walking into the Montgomery Industries board meeting together, where Xander was going to propose using part of the company's charitable foundation to fund a food truck program for homeless shelters across LA. Luna would run it, naturally. She'd already drawn up business plans that were more thorough than anything his Harvard-educated analysts had produced. His father was going to hate it. His mother was going to have concerns. The board was going to ask a lot of difficult questions. Xander couldn't wait. "You know," Luna said, taking his hand as they walked toward the gleaming glass tower, "when I stopped to help you that day, I thought I was just giving a ride to some poor bastard in a tuxedo. And now?" She squeezed his hand, her smile bright enough to power the entire city. "Now I know I was picking up the rest of my life." As they walked into the building together, the Montgomery heir and the woman with the food truck and the biggest heart in Los Angeles, Xander realized that sometimes the best things in life really did come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes all it took was a flat tire and the courage to get in the truck. The end.